In 1995, Sega of Japan handed down a task of critical importance to Team Andromeda. The studio had recently finished development on the on-rail shooter Panzer Dragoon, an incredibly well-received title, and one of only 6 games available at the surprise launch of the Sega Saturn in North America. They were riding high and ready to work on their next project. The task? To create an RPG to rival the then upcoming Final Fantasy VII, put the Saturn on the map, and help Sega win the console war. Final Fantasy VII's PlayStation exclusivity was a major coup for Sony, and the next entry in the venerable series was getting some major pre-release buzz. Sega felt that having a big RPG would be critical in their fight against Sony. 30 years later, it's easy to see that this task was doomed before it had begun. It's doubtful anyone or anything could have competed with Final Fantasy VII when it launched in 1997. FF7 was a landmark title with a meteoric impact on gaming for a multitude of reasons I don't want to dive too deeply into. We're not really here to talk about Final Fantasy VII today. In the context of history, however, the idea that Sega could win the console war with an RPG that could outdo Final Fantasy wasn't terribly far-fetched. I mean, it was still mostly far-fetched, but not outside the realms of possibility back in 1995. As late as early 1996, Sega was the market leader in both North America and Japan. The company had a 38% share of the US gaming market compared to Sony's 24%. Sega consoles past weren't exactly lacking in RPGs. Series such as Phantasy Star, Luna, and the Shining games were well loved, and with good reason. If Sega could get their big RPG out first, there was a chance that it could have the desired effect. And so, Team Andromeda split itself in two. One team would work on a direct sequel to Panzer Dragoon, Panzer Dragoon Y, which ended up launching in 1996, and a second team began work on Panzer Dragoon Saga, an RPG set in the world of Panzer Dragoon. Players had been captivated by the world that had been created for the shooter, and it was an aspect of the game that reviewers had raved about. It seemed like a no-brainer to allow them to explore beyond the confines of the rails they had been placed on in Panzer Dragoon. Unfortunately, due to a difficult and protracted development cycle, Panzer Dragoon Saga failed to materialize in time. In 1996, Sony cut the price of the PlayStation to $199, and Nintendo released the N64, and in 1997, the release of Final Fantasy VII saw PlayStation's popularity in the Japanese market surge. All of this meant that by the time the game actually released in 1998, the Saturn was effectively finished, far adrift from its rivals. In Japan, Panzer Dragoon Saga sold an estimated 110,000 copies. Outside of Japan, the picture was far bleaker. In focusing its attention on developing its next console, Sega had all but abandoned the Saturn. Panzer Dragoon Saga would be one of the last games released for the console in the West. There was no marketing push, save for a couple of print ads, according to former Sega of America employee Chris Lucic. Sega produced a mere 20,000 copies of the game for the US. When they sold out within 2 days, around another 2,000 to 5,000 were made, and when they sold out, no more copies were forthcoming. In Europe, Sega made just 1,000 copies of the game, and this was only due to the advocacy of then Sega Europe employee David Nolte, who was also credited as a producer on Panzer Dragoon Saga. But as we all know, or should know but seem to forget on a regular basis, the quality of a game is not measured by how many copies it sells, and Panzer Dragoon Saga's reception in 1998 sits in the sharpest possible contrast to its low sales figures. The few people who got hold of a copy raved about it. Reviewers tripped over themselves to lavish the game with superlatives. The game was showered with awards. Most called it the best RPG on the Sega Saturn. Some even suggested that it was every bit the equal of Final Fantasy VII. A few even dared to suggest it was better. I hate comparing games to other games, and I'm not here to tell you that Final Fantasy VII is better than Panzer Dragoon Saga or vice versa. In fact, this is the last time I'm going to mention Final Fantasy in this video. Both are RPGs, sure, and they share a lot in common. However, the differences between them are numerous. Both deserve to be massively successful, but the twists and turns of history are frequently cruel to the undeserving. To call Panzer Dragoon Saga a cult classic would be a criminal understatement. There's a compelling mystique to the game. I typically despise the phrase, the best game you've never played, because it's usually used by people on YouTube to describe a game enjoyed by a lot of people. And there is some irony in me using it here, considering the people most likely to click on a video about Panzer Dragoon Saga are people who've played it, but there's a sense that the phrase was coined exclusively to describe Panzer Dragoon Saga. There were so few copies of the game made that owning one feels like you've got one of Willy Wonka's golden tickets. The price of the remaining few is so high that seeing it is as effective a jump scare as that of any horror movie. Playing Panzer Dragoon Saga made me feel less like I was playing a mere piece of gaming history, and more that I was playing a piece of gaming folklore, a myth spoken about in hushed whispers. I knew from its reputation that Panzer Dragoon Saga was a unique RPG, but I don't think I truly appreciated how unique a game it is until I'd played it for myself. This is the obligatory spoiler warning section of the video. If you've got any inclination to play a Panzer Dragoon Saga for yourself, you should bail now. I'm going to discuss the game in quite a bit of detail from here on out, including a lot about the game's ending. It's probably no secret that I think it's a really great game, so if you do want to check it out for yourself, I do recommend that you give it a shot if you have an extreme amount of disposable income, or you can find another way to play it. Borrowing it off a generous friend, yeah, that's what I meant.
Thanks.
At the center of this uniqueness is Saga's battle system. The Panzer Dragoon series to this point had been a pair of rail shooters. Players rode a dragon that mostly flew itself, blasting enemies from its back with your gun, or holding down the fire button to use the dragon's lock-on lasers to blow up multiple targets at once, which I didn't figure out for the first 30 minutes because I'm an idiot who always forgets to read the manual. You're given some limited degree of movement, and you can swing the camera around to look behind you or to your sides as enemies will attack from all around you. It's in translating this fly and gun approach to combat that Team Andromeda crafted the centerpiece of Panzer Dragoon Saga, its truly distinctive battle system. I'm sure there's a world where Saga featured more traditional turn-based battle mechanics and was still a great game, but the 90s and early 2000s was a time of wild experimentation for turn-based RPGs, where it felt like every third new game felt truly unique in some way. Final Fantasy was massively different from Parasite Eve, which was massively different from Grandia, which was massively different from Kudelka, which, well, you get the point. Nowadays, all you have to do is add a parry mechanic to your turn-based combat, and you'll be heralded as the savior of the entire genre, apparently. But I digress. Panzer Dragoon Saga begins with Edge and some other mercenaries guarding an excavation site. The site is filled with relics from the Ancient Age. The civilization that lived during the Ancient Age vanished, but they left behind a bunch of relics and maybe some advanced technology too. The excavation is attacked by a monster, and Edge finds a woman buried in a wall. Before he can do anything other than go up at her, he and his company have to flee the cave. Unfortunately for the mercenaries, they're greeted outside by the Black Fleet, a group that have broken away from the Empire, and they're all shot down. Edge sees this, but can't do anything about it before being shot himself and falling into the void. Somehow surviving this, Edge finds a gun and a dragon, the two essential tools when beginning a quest for revenge. So, how do you take an on-rail shooter where you fly around on the back of a dragon and shoot everything with lasers, and faithfully translate that into a turn-based RPG? By making your combat system a turn-based one, where you fly around on the back of a dragon and shoot everything with lasers. Fights in Panzer Dragoon Saga take place on a 360-degree battlefield, with the enemy you're fighting at the center. Surrounding the enemy are 4 zones. Think of them as front, back, left, and right. You can fly your dragon around opponents into any of these 4 zones and attack them with either your gun or your dragon's lasers. You don't even need to read the manual to figure out how to fire your lasers this time, which I greatly appreciated. You also have access to a growing collection of berserk techniques that you unlock as the game progresses. These are special abilities your dragon can perform, a bit like magic. They can do things like explode everything, or throw up a shield to temporarily prevent damage, or heal your dragon. I call my dragon Panzer. He's the best boy. You can attack enemies from any direction, but your general aim is to charge your ATB bars, find enemy weak points, and avoid danger zones. The radar at the bottom of the screen shows your position in relation to an enemy and how dangerous each individual zone is. And to the side of the radar are your ATB bars. You've got 3 in total, each one representing one action you can take, though there are some berserk techniques that use 2. These bars fill up when you're stationary but stop filling if you start moving around. If a zone is green, it means an enemy will either not attack you at all, or any attack they do will miss. If a zone doesn't have a colour, then it means you can be hit with a standard attack that deals an average amount of damage. A red zone means danger, naturally, and that you're at risk of taking large amounts of damage. Weak points tend to be in these red zones, meaning to do a lot of damage, you often have to risk taking a lot of damage. At the end of each combat, you'll also be ranked on how quickly you beat an encounter and how much damage you take. The better you do, the higher your rank, and higher ranks reward more experience, which levels you up faster. Oh, and enemies can also move, so while you're chilling out in a green zone charging your ATB bars, an enemy might suddenly drop behind you and blast you with a powerful attack if you're not paying close attention to what's happening. Throughout the course of the game, Panzer Dragoon Saga uses its many different enemy types and boss encounters to throw twists on top of these mechanics, but these are the basics of combat in a nutshell. It sounds more complicated in explanation than it is in practice, and that's kind of the beauty of it. It takes a minute to get used to, but once you do, it feels pretty fantastic to play, especially since Team Andromeda went all in on enemy behavior variety, particularly in boss fights. The general loop of combat begins with you figuring out your basic tactics and those of your enemy. You fly around, get a handle on where the safe and dangerous spots are, and finding where weak spots are. Once you have an enemy figured out, you enter into the dance of combat, trying to position yourself for maximum advantage while your enemy does the same. Because you have to constantly be aware of where you're flying, you're constantly engaged in each battle, rather than waiting for your ATB bars to fill up and just pushing a button to attack. This means that even when you start fighting a lot of repeats of the same enemy, usually if you spend a long time in a single dungeon or area, or when you're fighting the Black Fleet, an omnipresent threat throughout all 4 discs, you still need to be engaged when you're in a fight. By the time fighting repeating enemies even started to feel like a bit of a drag in the 4th disc, I just made use of one of my area of effect berserk techniques to end fights in a giant explosion. I love causing giant explosions. I learned it from watching Star Trek.
To be or not to be.
Target that explosion and fire.
Fire!
This combat shines best in the game's boss fights, which take the basic mechanics I've already described and add some sort of twist. Almost all of the bosses do this, and to describe every one and why I enjoyed them would make this video far too long, so I'll just use one example, a boss you fight partway through the 1st disc called Latham. I think. All the voice acting is in Japanese, so I don't really know how to pronounce any of this stuff. The strategy here actually requires you to uncover its weak point before you can damage it. The best way to do this is by blasting the many growths on its back using lasers to destroy multiple targets at once. The twist is that when you blast these growths, the area you're occupying will become dangerous, and you open yourself up to taking a bunch of damage, and you might not even find the weak point, and even if you did, you have to attack it from this newly created danger zone. At its best, Panzer Dragoon Saga's combat keeps you constantly thinking, constantly moving, and constantly engaged in what you're doing. And there is, quite simply, nothing else like it, either before it came out or in the 27 years since. At least not that I've found anyway. If there is a game out there that's built on Saga's combat mechanics, please God drop me a mention of it in the comments. I would love to take a look at it. Unfortunately, Panzer Dragoon Saga's combat isn't always at its best. For starters, provided you're paying attention to what you're doing, this isn't a particularly challenging game, which in and of itself isn't actually a shocking revelation. Game is easier if you're playing it properly. Quel surprise. However, Panzer Dragoon Saga is a game that only gets easier as it goes on, to the point that when I was playing the final disc, I was basically unstoppable. If you play games like me, and God help me if you do, you're quite thorough when playing an RPG, and you're probably going to overlevel yourself by accident simply because of the amount of random encounters you'll bump into as you explore every nook and cranny of each of the maps. And every time you level up, your damage output increases. Extremely early on in the game, you're given the opportunity to buy the Sniper. This gun does 170% extra damage to enemy weak points, which is an outrageous damage boost, especially as hitting an enemy in its weak point already does extra damage. But later in the game, you can purchase the Pulverizer, a gun that gives you a flat 200% damage boost, whether you're targeting a weak point or not. Giving the player an item that doubles their damage for the endgame is fine, but it's like Saga wasn't balanced around the potential that players would have access to these weapons. It's not like the Sniper or Pulverizer are all locked behind side quests or hidden in obscure, hard-to-find areas of the map. They just appear in the shop at predetermined points, and you can buy them for a reasonable amount of money. It's not like you need to spend money on anything else. If you're even a little bit methodical with breaking item boxes, you'll never actually need to buy any items whatsoever. It's the reason why in all of the footage in this video, you've probably very rarely, if ever, seen me use any of the berserk techniques I mentioned earlier. Aside from using the occasional healing tech, or using a screen clearing attack for some random enemies just for the sake of speed, there's never really a need to use them. My gun was always the best option, and when I needed to target multiple enemies or an enemy was immune to gunfire, the Dragon's laser attack was more than sufficient. Because combat was still engaging, it never really felt like an issue until the final disc. Once you have the Pulverizer in your hands, nothing can stand in your way, and the final dungeon feels like Team Andromeda had mechanically run out of steam, especially at the end. Before facing the very final boss, you have to fight a series of 5 dragons. Each dragon is a different class, which, in theory, means that you'll need to use different tactics to beat them, right? Well, thankfully, the Pulverizer pulverized them. And I say thankfully because these bosses all felt pretty uninspired. There is no mechanical twist to any of them, no fancy maneuvering or special tactics. Nothing like fighting Latham and having to uncover a weak point while being mindful of the danger zones you were creating in the process. You shoot them from wherever you are because none of them have any weak points, and you barely move because there are never any safe zones to fly into. The last of these 5 bosses is the only one that can really cause any problems, purely because all 4 zones are dangerous, so you're going to take a ton of damage no matter what, and it also doesn't have any weak points, so movement becomes absolutely pointless. However, this boss can be trivialized by abusing an ability I haven't mentioned yet, and when I say abusing, what I actually mean is using the ability as it was intended. At some point, I can't remember specifically when, I unlocked the Shield Berserk technique, which is absolutely the most broken ability, not just in this game, but potentially that's ever been put into an RPG in the history of video games. For 2 ATB bars, you can put up a shield that negates all incoming damage. It lasts for about 4 ATB bars worth of charge, so if you throw up a shield, attack twice, then repeat, you effectively become invincible. The shield itself doesn't have a health bar and it can't be broken at all, unless an enemy uses a status clear attack, which I only remember the final boss actually using. I actually figured out I could do this way earlier than the penultimate boss, but decided against using it because I actually wanted to enjoy the combat, and being completely unkillable kind of ran counter to this enjoyment. I only used it here because I was annoyed that the game wasted its second to last boss fight by putting me against an enemy where movement was pointless, and I was going to take a ton of damage no matter what, which the final boss also does too. Except its attack animations are ridiculously long, it has a shit ton of health, and your window to actually attack it is vanishingly slim. You spend most of the final boss fight just waiting around to take a few thousand damage from an attack you can't dodge, before healing and hitting the boss maybe once or twice if you're lucky. I don't want to leave you with the impression that Panzer Dragoon's combat is bad. I spent more than 1,000 words talking about how much I enjoyed it, but it really does kind of fall apart somewhat at the end, and it does leave a slightly bitter aftertaste thanks to all of these compounding issues. Like, I've no doubt that if Team Andromeda had been able to make a sequel to Panzer Dragoon Saga, they could have refined the combat and potentially made the best RPG battle system ever. Instead of what might have been, we've got a game with unique combat mechanics that include a lot of high highs and a few lows. But if my enjoyment of how the game's battle system was used soured as it drew to a close, my enjoyment of Panzer Dragoon Saga's story went in an almost opposite trajectory. Rewinding back to the beginning of the game, after Edge flies away with his new dragon and vows revenge against Kramen and the Black Fleet for murdering his friends, the story kind of spins its wheels for almost its entire runtime. As Edge flies out of the excavation site, he rescues a man named Gash, who's being attacked by a monster. Once at camp, Gash directs Edge to a caravan, who will help him find the location of the Black Fleet, which leads to assaulting said fleet. These narrative beats repeat for the next 2.5 discs. Edge meets an NPC who will give him critical information, but only if he does them some kind of favour, usually a fetch quest or waging a one-man in his dragon war against the Empire. Only after doing this favour will Edge then be able to continue on his quest. It's not a terrible structure for an RPG story, but Edge's motivation and his understanding of the world and the motivations of the people he's sworn vengeance against don't really change or evolve for quite a while. There are a few side quests you can pursue to break up the early game structure, sending you back to previously visited areas to find items you've been asked to retrieve, or break item boxes whenever your dragon evolves its form and gets more powerful lasers. And I was more than happy to revisit these areas. One part of the Panzer Dragoon Saga experience that was consistently impressive was its atmosphere. I know that's a nebulous and not altogether useful word to use in game critique, but there really is no better way to describe the feelings this game evokes as you fly around its broken, yet strangely beautiful world. It's a combination of alien vistas that are aided by the signature graphical style of the Sega Saturn, the offbeat yet deeply compelling soundtrack, the overpronounced sound effects, and just the general overbearing feeling of loneliness. It's a mood that's difficult to put into words, so you know what, I'm not even going to try. Instead, I'll let you soak in the atmosphere yourself. Here's a clip of me exploring the sunken ruins of Uru, which is one of the best video game areas I've ever explored. The whole game's like this. It's a truly unique and incredible vibe, and there's nothing quite like it, at least not in anything I've played. Sega could remake this game with modern graphics and a higher resolution soundtrack, and I'm sure it'd be great, but it would definitely lose some of its atmosphere in the process. The side quests themselves, however, are fairly forgettable and pretty low impact. Like in this one side quest where the leader of the caravan is sick. One of the residents has gone off to search for something to help, but he hasn't come back yet, so Edge can fly off, find the item himself, and bring it back. This is all conveyed in a small handful of dialogues, and even when you bring the item back and save the village leader, you don't get much more than a, "Gee, thanks, you really saved the day. Have a gun for your troubles." Most of the NPC dialogue feels very workmanlike and lacking in much personality, and it makes a lot of the NPCs come off as one note. Some NPCs, such as Gash or another character I'm going to talk about shortly, fare a little better here, but that's mostly down to the fact that you interact with them multiple times throughout the course of the entire game, so they have less of a need to get to the point quickly. NPC interactions don't really come with a whole lot of dialogue. I've mentioned a couple of times that Panzer Dragoon Saga comes with 4 discs, and I want you to take that knowledge and guess how long it took me to finish the game. Go ahead. 4 discs. It's a lot of discs, right? If you guessed 17 hours, congratulations, you win the prize of being right and getting to say so in the comment section of a YouTube video. This wasn't a rushed 17 hours either. This time includes scouring the world for hidden items, completing optional quests, and getting hopelessly, hideously lost a couple of times. I've seen people online say it took them around 10 hours, and that actually seems fairly reasonable if you beeline through the main story. The Sega Saturn used CDs, you see. For younger viewers, or if you're watching this in the future and don't know anything about CDs, first of all, hi. Sorry about all the shit we've left you to deal with. And second of all, a CD had a memory storage capacity of 700 megabytes, which, you'll be shocked to know, is not a lot of megabytes. Especially not for a game with a ton of FMV cutscenes and full Japanese voice acting, the latter of which was basically unheard of in a console RPG at the time. Combined with the varied soundtrack and the many different areas you can revisit across all 4 discs at any time, and that's a lot of disk space being taken up. I know from reading interviews with the developers that the intention was to keep things vague and allow the world to be mysterious and the story to be open to player interpretation. This is an excellent choice and plays excellently to the game's strengths, as we'll discuss shortly, but it leaves NPCs with very little dialogue to work with and makes the majority of interactions you have with them feel basic and uninteresting. And until the game's plot really kicks into gear on Disc 3, this bled into the story as a whole. There is one character who's an exception to all of this. The girl Edge finds buried in the wall in the opening cutscene. After engaging the Black Fleet for the first time and learning that Kramen has made it to an ancient and powerful structure called the Tower, you're attacked by this girl, who is now riding a dragon and has allied herself with Kramen. While searching for a way into the tower in Uru, you'll be attacked by her again. After defeating her a second time, both she and Edge are knocked off their dragons and fall into an ancient underground facility. With the facility overrun by monsters, the pair form an alliance to escape. The girl is called Azel, and her dragon is Atom. She was bioengineered in this very facility to interact with ancient Age technology, and she was asleep for 1,000 years before Edge found her at the excavation site. She's allied herself with Kramen because he was the one who woke her up and gave her a purpose, and she doesn't actually hold any ill will towards Edge specifically, she's just defending Kramen. It's a fantastic section, although I could have done without being separated from her best boy and having to ride around on the back of a hoverbike fighting weak enemies. You learn a lot about the history of the world while exploring this ancient facility, and seeing Edge and Azel's relationship begin to take shape as they're trapped together for an extended period. Azel's character arc was the absolute highlight of the game's story. She complements Edge's single-minded need for revenge really well with her complicated motivations, which you get your first glimpse into here and will be fleshed out later. Probably a bit too much later, if I'm being honest, but we'll get into that in due course. If Panzer Dragoon Saga had spent more time developing Edge and Azel's relationship and less time focused on Edge's vengeance, I'd have probably been a lot more engaged in what was going on. After finally reaching the exit of the underground facility, you fight your way past a pair of really interesting bosses, including this one where you can't actually attack the boss directly. Instead, you have to shoot these enemies with your gun so they'll point upwards and reflect laser attacks up towards the boss. This doesn't really have anything to do with the story, it's just a really impressively designed boss fight. Not least of which because there's no hint that this is how you actually have to deal with the boss. You learn this tactic because you fight the smaller enemies throughout the facility as normal encounters, and probably learned the hard way about their ability to reflect lasers by attacking them and getting blasted in the face by your own attack. It's just really clever design, and I wanted to highlight it while I was here. After escaping the facility, Edge and Azel part ways. Azel warns Edge that despite everything they've just been through, if he crosses paths with Kramen again, she will have to kill him, which makes the fact that the next major story beat sees Kramen arrange a secret meeting with Edge to ask for his help very funny. Edge destroys a nearby Empire airbase at the behest of the leader of Zor, who's a bit of an arsehole, but he's got the information you need to get to the tower, so, you do what you gotta do. I'm sure attacking the Empire directly won't have any negative repercussions. Eventually, you clear a path to the tower, but you're attacked once again by Azel, and in the ensuing fight, you knock Atom out of the sky and save an unconscious Azel from plummeting to her death. After Azel wakes up later in the game, she becomes a sort of companion character as she and Edge work together. During conversation about the deep connection between dragons and their riders, she admits to missing Atom deeply, and this was my first clue that I had actually killed him. I just assumed he was recuperating like he was after the second Azel fight, and the fact that it's never mentioned before or after this single line of dialogue definitely feels weird. It's not a big deal or anything, but I would have expected a slightly bigger reaction, especially considering Edge is the one who killed him. I mean, I've only had Panzer for a day and a half, but if anything happened to him, I would kill everyone in this room and then myself. Before any of that happens, though, the Empire launches its flagship, the Grigor Rig, and it destroys Zoa in retribution for the destruction of the airbase. Oops. This is a really good escalation of the stakes of the story. I mean, it definitely would have hit harder if I'd particularly cared about any of the characters who lived in the village, and it's undercut a little later by finding out that many of the NPCs you've been doing quests for somehow escaped in time, but it's nevertheless a great moment. One which Panzer Dragoon Saga probably could have done with having a bit earlier than almost 3 full discs into the game. Luckily, 3 full discs only represents about 12 or so hours of the game, so it could have been a lot worse. But we're here now, and the story is not fucking around anymore. The destruction of Zoa feels like when the story finally actually gets going, and it really is non-stop from there. A lot happens in the last few hours of the game, and I don't want to make this video even longer than it already is by describing it all in depth. The main crux of it is that you learn the tower is a relic of the ancient age, designed to keep the world safe, and it's been creating the monsters you've been fighting to stop humanity's destructive tendencies. Kramen and Edge team up to try to stop the Emperor from taking control of the tower, but fail, resulting in Kramen dying and the Emperor forcing Azel to activate the tower, which unleashes hordes of monsters and dragons in a really cool cutscene. Even when I wasn't hugely invested in the story, I have to heap praise on the FMV scenes in Panzer Dragoon Saga. From beginning to end, they're just extremely well designed and thoroughly entertaining, and I tip my hat to the designers responsible for their creation. It's a cowboy hat. Yeehaw! Only Azel can actually deactivate the tower, as she was created to be able to allow humans to use ancient age technology, and Gash believes that Edge's dragon is the Divine Visitor, a being that prophecy says will be humanity's salvation. So the trio must fight their way to the tower and destroy it. Like I said, it all starts kicking off in the final third of the game. It's here as the game reaches its climax where the arcs for our 2 protagonists come into sharp focus. Edge learns to stop simply fighting for vengeance and instead fight for the good of others, and Azel... we'll circle back to her later. At the base of the tower, Azel plugs herself in and prepares to give Edge access to the Saturn AI, which powers the tower, and which he needs to destroy so that Azel can destroy the tower. But first their relationship culminates with Azel telling Edge that she loves him, which apparently was an addition to the English translation of the game. Her love confession wasn't explicit in the Japanese version, instead left up to players to infer from subtext.
I know writers who use subtext, and they're all cowards.
After entering what I can only describe as a Sega Saturn acid trip and defeating the final boss gauntlet, Edge and the dragon confront the Saturn AI, where we learn that the dragon isn't the Divine Visitor, but another Saturn AI that went rogue to help humanity, and the Divine Visitor is the one from the outside world who has guided Edge. Honestly, I thought this game was trippy enough with whatever the fuck is going on in this environment, but then the dragon started talking, and then the characters in the game started talking to me as the person playing the game. Panzer Dragoon Saga just goes absolutely fucking wild in its last scenes, and I'm here for every second of it, honestly. I complete the task I set out to accomplish from the moment I first started playing, which is completing the game, as Edge and the dragon disappear into the network. There is one more scene after the credits, though. Azel is travelling west, through an apparently extremely dangerous desert, in search of Edge. This final scene ties up Azel's character arc absolutely fantastically. From the first moment you meet her in battle, and throughout your fleeting encounters with her in the first 2/3 of the game, she believes her purpose is clear: to help Kramen deactivate the tower. Her fundamental belief is that this is her destiny, and she has no choice in the matter. But as she travels with Edge, she becomes more human, and with that humanity comes a realization that she has the freedom to make her own choices. It's something she struggles with throughout the final part of the game, culminating in her deciding of her own free will that she will finish her task, even though there's little chance that she'll come back from it. And she thanks Edge for helping her find that freedom, which is quite ironic since it's Edge who really didn't have a choice in the matter, given that he was being guided by the player this entire time. I love a really delicious, Moorish irony. Azel's final scene is fascinating because it throws up the possibility that she made a different choice at the last moment. There was a strong implication that if she destroyed the tower after Edge defeated the Cestron AI, that she would destroy herself in the process. But instead she's here, searching for Edge, suggesting that maybe she didn't actually go through with it, which is the perfect conclusion to her character arc. For all the critiques I have of the late game combat and the pacing and structure of the early parts of the story, Panzer Dragoon Saga manages to find its way to an incredible end, paying off the relationship that was at the core of its narrative in an effective and emotionally satisfying way. It also manages to thread the needle of resolving just enough of its plot to feel complete, yet leaves just enough open to interpretation. The questions it leaves you with ensure that the game will stick with you long after the credits have rolled, and long after Azel has taken off west in search of Edge. And that's Panzer Dragoon Saga, a fantastic RPG that was doomed to never have the chance to cement itself as an essential part of gaming history, released on a console whose library is unfairly looked down on. Simply put, there's nothing quite like it, and I wish I could recommend that you check it out for yourself in good conscience. Sadly, unless you have a lot of money to spare on a single video game, or unless Sega finally stops pretending that the Saturn never happened, it's an incredibly hard video game to actually play. It's here that I could go on a diatribe about the woeful state of game preservation that locks most people out of playing some truly wonderful games that they otherwise missed or simply weren't around for, but I'll save that for a future video I've got cooking on the subject. To be continued, I guess. I could also write several thousand words in defense of the Saturn itself, but a quick glance at the spreadsheet I have for future video ideas, which has another 7 games from the platform on the list, tells me that my channel itself will slowly become that defense over time. For real though, the Saturn's library of unique and excellent games is severely overlooked, to the shame of all of us. Instead, I'll end the video with this. Panzer Dragoon Saga might not have managed to dethrone Final Fantasy VII as Sega intended. Does that make it a failure? I mean, yeah, sure, if you're a Sega executive. Although, if you are, I don't know how you found my video, but while I've got you here, you should release a Sega Saturn Mega Collection like you did for the Sega Mega Drive. I would definitely buy it and bully all my friends into buying it as well. But for the rest of us, no, Panzer Dragoon Saga was not a failure. The only failure lies in the fact that the game was buried, almost forgotten, and is difficult to experience for the vast majority that missed it. As a piece of art, Panzer Dragoon Saga was a roaring success. Its legacy may only extend to a single game released on a dying console in limited numbers, but the reputation it has earned, from those lucky enough to have experienced it, is most definitely well deserved. Thank you very much for watching.